So first of all, I want to thank the organizing committee for putting this together and giving me the opportunity to share a little bit of my research. I'll get this. To share a little bit of my research. And when I was sitting down to write this presentation, which is always the case with talks sometimes, is that you forget what you're really trying to say. And I think this presentation really is a reflection more so than anything declarative. I want to thank Professor Walker for his engaging talk this morning. And I want to sort of think about this historical present that perhaps we're being alerted to throughout all of the presentation. So I'm actually going to start with this image, and my slideshow is very bare. It's only 5 slides, actually. But I'm going to start here. So in November of 2007, a York Regional Police officer was traveling in the northern area of York Region in the Georgina area, and he came upon this home. And what he found was actually this. So he found a life-size plastic skeleton, painted black, hanging from a noose in the front of the home. Above the skeleton was a Confederate flag. You can see it just in the top of the first image there. With the flags, "If the South would have won, we would have had it made," written along the top. When the police officer who attended the home asked the resident to remove the offensive material, he refused. So Luke Granados, he was 26 at the time, was charged with the willful promotion of hatred and was sentenced to 45 days in jail. In response to the discovery, York Region's police chief stated, "Every member of our community needs to engage in the fight against hatred. Those people who target a particular community threaten all communities. And when you victimize one community, you victimize all communities." So this is my entry point into discussions about anti-black racism, policing, and the behavior of the criminal justice system. And it's really through the frame of hate and hate crime. And in particular, I want to examine police practices. So while much of the critical race scholarship has examined issues of targeted policing, racial profiling, and the enduring link between processes of racialization and criminalization, few have examined or used hate crime as a site for thinking about questions of policing, institutional reform, and the contemporary racial moment. So that's what I want to do here. In Canada, hate as an object of criminal justice attention first came to the fore following the Cohen Report. This was in the mid-1960s. And these concerns largely stemmed from increased attention to human rights, which became a prominent focus nationally and internationally in the wake of the Second World War, and the establishment of a modern, multicultural Canadian national identity. So concerns over hate also centered on fears that Canadian youth would fall victim to the influence of organized hate groups, whose activities had increased in Canada in the United States. The Cohen Report was instrumental in redefining hate propaganda in particular as a threat to Canadian society. The report, which stated that the dangers of hate were limited in Canada, but called for extreme measures to be taken in order to avoid the problem from getting out of hand. And the Cohen Report was foundational in the establishment of Canada's hate propaganda laws. So those are the laws that criminalize advocating genocide, the public incitement of hatred, and the willful promotion of hatred. The most recent addition to Canada's hate crime provisions is Section 718.2ai of the Canadian Criminal Code. Section 718 sentencing reforms were developed as an initiative of Parliament in the mid-1990s to provide judges with additional direction in making sentencing decisions. Parliament's overarching goal was for sentencing to contribute, along with crime prevention initiatives, to respect for law and the maintenance of a just, peaceful, and orderly society. This sentencing objective was to be accomplished through denunciation, deterrence, the separation and rehabilitation of offenders, reparations to victims and communities, the promotion of responsibility on behalf of offenders, and the acknowledgement of the harms committed to victims. So along with clarifying the purpose of sentencing, Parliament also established a number of aggravating factors to be considered when sentencing an offender. These included consideration of evidence that an offender was motivated by hate, bias, or prejudice, and the statute reads this way. So a court that imposes a sentence shall also take into consideration evidence that the offense was motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate based on race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, or any other similar factors. In many ways, debates about the need to have these enhanced sentencing measures for hate crimes center on two sort of very foundational things. One, the protection of individual rights and the rule of law, and two, the importance of using the law as an instrument to make a statement about collective values. So the symbolic function of the law in standing up for national commitments to tolerance has been the most widely cited argument by proponents of these forms of legislation. They argue that criminal law plays a very important role in demarcating the boundaries between acceptable and unacceptable conduct. By deeming certain activities to be subject to state sanctions, Martha Schaefer notes, the criminal law plays a normative or symbolic role in instructing citizens about what types of conduct give rise to social abhorrence. But in addition to legislative changes, police services are now required under the Police Services Act to maintain a hate crime policy. New law enforcement units in the form of hate crime teams and specialist officers who investigate hate crime have also emerged in Canada. These units, which now form features of all major metropolitan Canadian police forces, are charged with the responsibility of attending to, investigating, and thoroughly documenting hate-motivated incidents. Police officers who form part of hate crimes units are responsible for assisting local agencies with hate crime investigation, training police personnel, delivering education programs, conducting public awareness campaigns, and working in conjunction with community groups, provincial ministries, local, provincial, and national law enforcement agencies, and even human rights groups in order to combat and solve the issue of hate. And all of these changes in the context of hate crime are on top of many of the changes that have happened in policing, which have introduced diversity and race relations units, community policing officers, and even debates about technological changes such as police body-worn cameras in order to make policing more transparent and accountable. But police responses to hate crime cannot be truly understood without situating these responses within the wider context of policing. So at the very same time that police work to protect vulnerable communities and uphold wider commitments of diversity and inclusion, police services have engaged in practices that systemically discriminate against some of the very same communities that hate crime laws are designed to protect. So in the last year alone, we have seen what seems to be a massive pushback against greater transparency and accountability in policing. Police unions have worked hard to dilute claims that policing is racialized. police chiefs and police services boards have fought to hold on to the practice of carding, the random and largely arbitrary stopping and questioning of citizens in the name of public safety. Those who have vocally pronounced that Black Lives Matter have been met with the response, all lives matter, or blue lives matter, in attempts to disqualify their claims and marginalize their voices. These things, commitments to bias-free policing and biased policing, seem to be occurring in parallel. So what do these seemingly contradictory trajectories reveal about the nature of policing? The intensification of concerns about anti-Black racism in policing have been fueled by its increasing visibility and frequency on national media outlets in the United States and Canada. The names of unarmed Black men publicly executed by police on the streets of major American cities, Mike Brown, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Laquan McDonald, Walter Scott, the recent shooting of Andrew Loku, have brought many of these issues to the fore again. It seems as though a paradox of sorts lies at the heart of policing, right? The tacit acknowledgement that racial and cultural communities have been underserved by police have prompted police to, on the one hand, attempted to move past race, to deem it irrelevant, or, on the other, to embrace it as an institutional asset. But this paradox seems to run deeper than even policing, to the very foundations of our liberal democratic order. As David Goldberg would say, so the irony of modernity, the liberal paradox, comes down to this. As modernity commits itself progressively to idealize principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, as it increasingly insists upon the moral irrelevance of race, there is a multiplication of racial identities and the sets of exclusions they prompt and rationalize, enable, and sustain. Race is irrelevant, yet all is race. So, in the context of anti-Black racism, it provokes new questions about hate crime, for me at least. What truly are hate crimes? Is hate crime as an object of academic study and as a target of law enforcement practice maintained by artificial binaries that distinguish individual acts of hate from systemic forms of oppression? How might acknowledging racism in the form of hate work to obscure the very systems of power it claims to combat? Or perhaps put differently, what happens when addressing problems of racism become about addressing problems of hate? If the process of naming crimes as hate crimes involves making some things visible and other things less visible, what gets accomplished in the moment that certain criminal acts are transformed from crimes into hate crimes? How might using the language of hate to define crime and hate mongers to name the perpetrators function to shift responsibility rather than acknowledge it? And what I've really been reflecting on, sort of even in writing this paper, were the words of Du Bois in 1903. He said that the problem of the 20th century was a problem of the color line. So I'll leave it there.